Hello, my name is Peden-Asarch, and today I will be presenting on the long-term consequences of adolescent alcohol use on morphine tolerance and fentanyl self-administration. Adolescent alcohol use and opioid addiction are systemic issues afflicting the world, and thus it is important to elucidate the long-term individual and relational consequences of both substance abuse disorder. The purpose of this experiment is to examine the long-term consequences of voluntary adolescent alcohol use on morphine tolerance, fentanyl self-administration, and the effects of previous opioid exposure on fentanyl self-administration in adulthood. Around 7.1 million Americans between the ages of 12 to 20 reported alcohol use, and roughly 15.1 million Americans had alcohol use disorder. 49.8 million Americans have consumed opioids in their life, and the CDC has said that we are amid an opioid epidemic. It's important to note that recent studies have shown that adolescent alcohol use can cause increased impulsivity, maladaptive decision making, and reward valuation in adults. Additionally, this epidemic, along with the widespread use of adolescent alcohol use and negative effects of that alcohol use develops, brings into question how much adolescent alcohol use can affect the likelihood of having an opioid addiction and or tolerance to opioids. Therefore, the phenomena found in this experiment could lay out a new framework aimed at preventing opioid use disorder for medical professionals prescribing opioids, since previous opioid exposure and or long-term adolescent alcohol use can exacerbate one's chances of developing opioid use disorder. Using a preclinical model to examine this hypothesis, adolescent rats postnatal day 30 to 50 had access to alcohol in gelatin form for 20 days, after which a prolonged withdrawal period occurred. Morphine will then be administered intraperitoneally twice a day for 5 days, and morphine-induced analgesia will be measured by a tail flick test on the 6th day. Finally, fentanyl self-administration will occur in an operant chamber, and self-administration will be measured by the amount of fentanyl consumed. All work in this trial was conducted under the guidance and permission of the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee at the University of Washington and pursuant to federal regulations regarding work with animals. I hypothesize that adolescent alcohol use will increase morphine tolerance as evidenced by decreased tail flick time, and fentanyl self-administration will also be increased. Additionally, I hypothesize that previous opioid exposure will increase fentanyl self-administration. Future research will examine the neurobiological mechanisms by which adolescent alcohol use increases morphine tolerance and fentanyl self-administration, and how previous opioid exposure increases fentanyl self-administration, since these neurobiological mechanisms are not well understood. Our results may show that adults exposed to alcohol during adolescence exhibit increased morphine tolerance and increased fentanyl self-administration, and previous exposure to opioids increased fentanyl self-administration. Therefore, if true, we would have provided compelling evidence that adolescent alcohol use promotes tolerance of opioids and propensity for fentanyl addiction. However, the direct mechanisms of action of this phenomena is unknown. Therefore, physicians can now have more guidelines when prescribing opioids, such as previous adolescent alcohol use and or previous opioid exposure. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. More information on the topic can be found on these references below.